The town hall had never looked so grand. Rows of soft yellow lights hung from the ceiling, and white flowers were placed carefully along the stage. People from every corner of the town had gathered for the annual music competition. It was the kind of evening where everyone dressed a little better and spoke a little softer. Parents held programs in their hands, whispering to each other about which performer might win. Children waited backstage, some stretching their fingers, others closing their eyes to calm their racing hearts. The special guest of the night was a famous concert pianist. He had traveled across many countries, performed in large theaters, and won several awards. His arrival had created excitement in the town for weeks. Posters with his photo were placed outside music schools and cafes. People admired his talent and his strict standards. Many said that if he praised someone, that person's future would change forever. He arrived at the hall in a neat black suit, walking with confidence. When he stepped inside, people stood up to greet him. The organizers shook his hand with wide smiles. He nodded politely, though his expression remained serious. He had judged many competitions before. To him, this was just another evening. Backstage, the young participants waited nervously. Among them stood a small girl, barely tall enough to reach the higher shelves in her classroom. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her dress was clean but not expensive. She held her music sheets carefully, though she had already memorized every note. Her mother stood beside her, adjusting the collar of her dress and brushing away invisible dust from her shoulder. The girl had entered her name weeks ago without expecting much attention. She loved the piano more than anything. She did not think about trophies or applause. For her, playing music felt like speaking without words. It was the only place where she felt fully understood. When the famous pianist received the list of participants, he glanced over it quickly. Most of the names belonged to teenagers and young adults from well-known music schools. Then his eyes stopped at one entry. The age written beside it made him raise an eyebrow. He looked again, thinking there must be a mistake. 9 years old, he murmured. One of the organizers smiled nervously. Yes, she insisted on participating. Her teacher believes she is ready. The pianist gave a short laugh. It was not loud, but it was sharp enough to be heard by those nearby. She's just a child, he said, shaking his head lightly. This competition is serious. A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. The words traveled quickly backstage. The girl heard them. She did not react at first. She simply lowered her eyes and tightened her grip on the music sheets. Her mother noticed the change in her face. Do not listen, her mother whispered gently. Play the way you always do. That is enough. The girl nodded. She had heard similar words before. Some neighbors had once said she was too young to understand real music. Some relatives had suggested she should wait a few years before dreaming big. She had learned not to argue. Instead, she practiced more. The sound of applause filled the hall as the first performer walked onto the stage. One by one, the contestants played. Some chose fast and powerful pieces. Others selected soft and emotional melodies. The audience clapped politely after each performance. The pianist listened carefully, sometimes making small notes with his pen. His face showed little emotion. Backstage, the girl waited quietly for her turn. She watched the older participants walk confidently toward the stage. Some wore expensive dresses and polished shoes. Their families surrounded them with encouraging words. For a moment, she felt very small. Her mind drifted back to her home. Their house was modest, with walls that needed fresh paint. In the corner of the living room stood an old upright piano. It had scratches on the wood, and one key made a slightly different sound. Her father had found it in a storage shop years ago and repaired it as best as he could. It was not perfect, but to her it was beautiful. Every evening after school, she would finish her homework quickly and sit at that piano. Sometimes the electricity would go out, and she would continue playing by the light of a small lamp. Her fingers had grown stronger over time. She did not have a private tutor from a famous academy. Her teacher at school guided her as much as possible, but most of her improvement came from hours of quiet practice. Music was her safe place. When she played, She forgot about teasing classmates or worried looks from adults. She forgot about the times when money was tight at home. The piano keys felt like friends who never judged her. A volunteer called her name softly. "You are next." Her heart began to beat faster. She took a deep breath. Her mother squeezed her hand once and smiled. "Remember," she said, "just tell your story through the music." The girl stepped closer to the stage entrance. The bright lights from the hall made it difficult to see clearly. She could hear the audience clapping for the previous performer. Then came a brief silence as the announcer spoke her name. There was a small pause. Some people in the audience looked around, expecting someone older to appear. Instead, they saw a small figure walking slowly toward the grand piano at the center of the stage. A few whispers spread across the room. "Is she really competing? She looks so young." The pianist leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. His expression carried doubt. He did not expect much. In his experience, true mastery required many years of discipline. He believed talent grew slowly like a tree. The girl reached the piano bench and adjusted it carefully. Her feet barely touched the pedals. She bowed politely to the audience, just as she had practiced in her living room. The hall felt enormous compared to her small frame. For a moment, she closed her eyes. In that quiet second, she remembered the evenings at home. She remembered her father listening from the kitchen, pretending not to wipe tears from his eyes. She remembered her mother humming softly while washing dishes. Those memories gave her strength. She placed her fingers gently on the keys but did not begin to play yet. The silence stretched longer than expected. The audience shifted slightly in their seats. The pianist glanced at his watch. Then, just as nerves threatened to rise, she opened her eyes. Her expression changed. The fear slowly faded, replaced by calm focus. It was the same look she had every night when she practiced alone. The first note had not yet been played, but something in the air felt different. Even the whispers had stopped. The famous pianist straightened slightly in his chair, not because he expected greatness, but because he sensed a strange confidence in her posture. Backstage, her mother stood very still, her hands pressed together. The girl took one more quiet breath. And just as her fingers prepared to press the first key, the room seemed to hold its breath with her. The first note filled the hall like a soft whisper. It was gentle, almost fragile, but clear enough to reach the back row. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. The sound was not rushed or shaky. It was steady. The famous pianist's eyes lifted from his notes. He had expected hesitation. Instead, he heard control. The girl continued, her fingers moving carefully across the keys. The melody grew slowly, like sunlight spreading across a quiet morning. There was something unusual about the way she played. She did not move dramatically or try to impress anyone with fast gestures. Her small hands stayed relaxed. Every note had meaning. In the third row, an elderly woman placed her hand over her chest. A father in the back stopped checking his phone. Even the organizers near the curtains forgot to whisper. The pianist straightened in his chair. His arms slowly uncrossed. He listened more closely now. The piece she had chosen was not simple. It required balance and emotional depth. Many older students struggled with its softer sections because they tried too hard to make it sound powerful. But she was not forcing anything. Her mind was not in the hall anymore. As she played, she remembered the first time she touched a piano key. She had been very small, standing beside her father while he repaired an old instrument in their living room. She pressed one key gently and laughed at the sound. That small sound had stayed in her heart. She remembered the winter evenings when cold air slipped through the windows. She would wrap a thin sweater around herself and practice scales again and again until her fingers felt warm. Sometimes she made mistakes and grew frustrated. Sometimes tears fell quietly onto the keys. But she never walked away for long. Back in the hall, the melody began to rise. The gentle beginning turned into something stronger. Her left hand moved with confidence, creating a deep and steady rhythm. Her right hand danced above it, light but sure. The pianist felt a strange feeling in his chest. It was not shock yet. It was curiosity. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He wanted to understand how such maturity could come from someone so young. The audience could sense the shift in energy. The whispers from earlier were gone. Now there was only music. She moved into the most difficult part of the piece. It was the section where many performers lost control. The notes came faster. The dynamics changed quickly. One wrong move could break the entire flow. Her fingers did not hesitate. She had practiced this part many times at home. When she first learned it, she could not play it smoothly. Her teacher had suggested choosing an easier piece for the competition. But she had shaken her head. Something about this music felt personal. Felt like her story. So she practiced in small parts. Slowly at first. Then a little faster. Over and over again until her hands remembered what her mind sometimes forgot. Now, on the stage, her body moved naturally. The difficult section passed like a wave that rose high but never crashed. A quiet sound escaped from someone in the audience. It was not applause. It was disbelief. The pianist's expression had changed completely. There was no trace of amusement left. His eyes followed her hands carefully. He noticed her control over volume, the gentle way she shaped each phrase. These were not things children usually understood deeply. These were things that came from feeling. As the piece entered its emotional center, the hall seemed smaller, more intimate. The girl's face showed concentration, but also something softer. She was not trying to win. She was telling something. In the front row, her mother felt tears building in her eyes. She remembered the day her daughter had come home from school, upset because someone had laughed at her dream of becoming a concert pianist. That night, she had played for hours, not angrily, but with quiet determination. The mother had once worried that the world might be too harsh for someone so sensitive. But watching her now, she realized sensitivity was not weakness. It was strength. The music softened again, almost returning to the gentle whisper from the beginning. The hall remained perfectly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter. The pianist felt something unexpected. He felt small. He remembered his own childhood, the long hours of strict lessons, the pressure from teachers who rarely smiled. He had learned discipline early, but he had also learned pride. Over the years, applause had become normal. Respect had become expected. He suddenly saw himself earlier that evening, laughing lightly at the idea of a 9-year-old competitor. The memory felt uncomfortable. On stage, the girl moved into the final section. The melody rose one last time, stronger than before but still controlled. Her small hands reached wider across the keys. She pressed the final chords with clarity and confidence. The last note echoed gently through the hall. Then there was silence. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer. The audience seemed frozen, as if unsure whether the performance had truly ended. Then someone stood up. Applause burst across the room, loud and honest. It was not polite clapping. It was the kind that rises from surprise and respect. More people stood. The sound grew stronger. The girl blinked, almost confused. She had been so lost in the music that she had forgotten about the crowd. She slowly stood up and bowed again, her braid falling over her shoulder. The pianist did not clap immediately. He remained seated, looking at her with deep focus. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet as well. His applause was steady. The audience noticed. Whispers spread again, but this time they carried admiration. The girl walked off the stage carefully. As soon as she reached backstage, her mother wrapped her arms around her. Neither of them spoke at first. "You played from your heart," her mother finally whispered. The girl smiled shyly. "I just played the way I always do." Other contestants looked at her differently now. Some with respect, some with surprise, a few with quiet inspiration. The organizers hurried to prepare for the next performance, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone knew they had witnessed something special. The famous pianist remained thoughtful as he sat back down. He did not look at his notes. Instead, he stared at the stage where the small figure had just stood. For the first time that evening, he questioned his own judgment. He realized that talent does not wait for age. It does not ask for permission. Sometimes it grows quietly in small homes with old pianos and thin walls. Sometimes it practices while the world sleeps. As the next performer began, the pianist listened, but part of his mind stayed with the girl. He no longer saw her as just a child. He saw a musician. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it created stayed in the hall. People kept turning their heads toward backstage, as if expecting the small girl to appear again. The next performer walked onto the stage, confident and prepared, but something had shifted in the room. The audience was still thinking about what they had just heard. Backstage, the girl sat quietly on a wooden chair. Her hands rested on her lap. They were no longer shaking. In fact, they felt strangely calm. She could still hear the echo of the final note in her mind. She did not know whether she would win. She only knew that she had played honestly. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand. Neither of them cared much about the trophy at that moment. What mattered was that she had not allowed doubt to control her. On the other side of the curtain, the famous pianist remained deep in thought. He watched each performer carefully, but now his attention was sharper. He found himself comparing every performance to the one he had almost dismissed. One teenager played with impressive speed, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. The audience applauded politely. Another performer chose a dramatic piece filled with loud sections and bold movements. It was powerful, but something felt missing. The pianist realized what it was. Feeling. Technique was important. Training was important. But feeling was rare. During a short break, the organizers invited the judges to a small room for refreshments. The pianist walked in slowly, still thinking. One of the local music teachers approached him with a careful smile. "What do you think so far?" the teacher asked. He paused before answering. "There is more talent here than I expected," he said honestly. The teacher hesitated, then spoke again. "And the youngest participant?" He looked down for a moment. "She surprised me," he admitted. "I misjudged her." Those words were not easy for him to say. He was used to being right. Years of experience had built his confidence. But this evening had shown him something different. Meanwhile, the girl remained backstage, listening to the faint sound of music from the hall. She felt tired now. Performing had taken all her energy. She leaned gently against her mother's shoulder. "Are you happy?" her mother asked softly. The girl nodded. "I was scared at first," she whispered. "But when I started playing, it felt like home." Her mother smiled. That was exactly what she had hoped for. As the competition continued, people began discussing her performance quietly. Some said it was the best of the night. Others said she was too young to understand the piece fully, even if she played it well. Opinions were divided, but no one ignored her. After the final contestant finished, the announcer returned to the stage. "Thank you to all our wonderful performers," he said warmly. "Our judges will now take a few minutes to decide the results." The hall filled with low conversations. Parents hugged their children. Friends exchanged nervous smiles. In the judges' room, papers were spread across the table. Each judge had written notes and scores. The famous pianist looked at his sheet for a long time before speaking. "We have strong performers," one judge said. "But there is one who stands apart." The pianist nodded slowly. "Yes," he agreed. Another judge adjusted her glasses. "Are we all thinking of the same person?" Silence filled the room for a brief moment. Then the pianist spoke clearly. "The youngest participant." The others exchanged looks. One of them smiled. "I was hoping you would say that." They began discussing her performance in detail. Not her age, not her background, only her music. Her dynamics were controlled, one judge said. Her interpretation was mature, another added. The pianist listened carefully, then shared his own thoughts. "What impressed me most," he said, "was her honesty. She did not try to show off. She respected the piece. That was something he valued deeply." After careful discussion, the decision was made. Backstage, the girl felt her stomach tighten again as footsteps approached. A volunteer called all participants to line up beside the stage. Some smiled confidently. Others looked down, whispering quiet prayers. The girl stood at the end of the line. She felt small again, surrounded by taller competitors. But this time, she did not feel invisible. The announcer stepped forward with an envelope in his hand. The hall grew silent. "Third place," he began, calling out a name. Applause filled the room as a teenage boy stepped forward to receive his certificate. "Second place," he continued. Another name was called. More applause. The girl's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if others could hear it. The announcer opened the final card. "And first place in this year's competition goes to..." He paused, smiling. "Our youngest performer." For a second, the girl did not move. She was not sure she had heard correctly. Her mother gently pushed her forward. The audience erupted into applause once again, louder than before. Some people stood up. Others wiped tears from their eyes. She walked slowly onto the stage, her steps careful but steady. The trophy looked almost too big for her small hands. The famous pianist stepped forward to present the award. For a brief moment, their eyes met. He bent slightly so he could speak to her at eye level. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I should not have judged you before listening." Her eyes widened slightly. She shook her head shyly. "It's okay," she whispered. But it was not just okay. It was important. He handed her the trophy and then did something unexpected. He turned to the microphone. "Talent does not depend on age," he said clearly to the audience. Tonight, we were reminded of that. The crowd applauded again. The girl looked out at the sea of faces. She felt overwhelmed, but not frightened. The stage no longer felt too big. Felt like a beginning. As she walked back to her place, trophy in hand, she caught sight of her mother. Pride shone in her eyes brighter than any stage light. That evening did not change who she was. She was still the same girl who practiced on an old piano in a small living room. She still had homework to finish and chores to do. But something inside her had grown. And something inside the famous pianist had changed too. He watched her leave the stage, no longer seeing just a child. He saw the future of music standing quietly in simple shoes, holding a trophy almost bigger than her dreams. And he knew he would remember this night for the rest of his life. The ride home that night felt different. The trophy rested carefully on the girl's lap as she sat in the back seat beside her mother. Streetlights passed by the window one after another, creating soft flashes of light across her face. She kept looking down at the award, almost as if she expected it to disappear. Her father was waiting outside their house when the car stopped. He had not been able to attend the competition because of work, but he had been checking his phone again and again for updates. When he saw the trophy through the car window, his face lit up in a way she would never forget. He did not say much at first. He simply hugged her tightly. His hands were rough from years of repairing instruments and lifting heavy tools, but his embrace was gentle. "I knew you would make us proud," he said quietly. That night, they placed the trophy on top of the old upright piano in the living room. It looked almost strange there, surrounded by worn wood and faded paint. But somehow it also looked right. The next morning, life returned to normal. The girl woke up early for school. She packed her bag, tied her hair neatly, and walked down the same streets she always had. A few neighbors smiled at her differently. Word had spread quickly. At school, her classmates surrounded her during the break. Some asked to see pictures. Others asked how it felt to win. A few who had once laughed at her dream now stood quietly, unsure of what to say. She answered every question politely. She did not brag. She did not speak loudly. She simply said, "I just practiced a lot." Her music teacher called her to the front of the classroom later that day. "You have shown everyone what dedication can do," the teacher said with pride. "But remember, this is only the beginning." Those words stayed in her mind. Meanwhile, in a hotel room across town, the famous pianist was preparing to leave. His suitcase lay open on the bed, but he had not finished packing. He kept thinking about the competition. He had judged hundreds of young musicians over the years. Many were talented. Some were extraordinary, but very few had changed him. He walked to the window and looked down at the quiet street. For the first time in a long while, he felt humbled. He remembered his own childhood clearly now. His parents had been strict about practice. Every mistake was corrected immediately. Every achievement was expected. Applause had become something normal to him. Over time, he had learned to expect excellence and dismiss anything less. But the small girl had reminded him of something he had forgotten. Music was not about proving superiority. It was about connection. Before leaving town, he made an unexpected decision. Instead of going straight to the airport, he asked the event organizer for the girl's address. That afternoon, there was a knock on the door of the modest house with fading paint. The girl's mother opened it and froze in surprise. The famous pianist stood outside, holding a small box. He removed his sunglasses and smiled politely. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. The girl, hearing the voice, rushed to the doorway. Her eyes widened. He stepped inside and looked around the small living room. His eyes stopped at the old upright piano. The trophy still stood proudly on top of it. "This is where you practice?" he asked gently. She nodded. He walked closer to the instrument and ran his fingers lightly across its surface. The wood showed signs of age. One key was slightly uneven, but it had character. "May I?" he asked. She stepped aside quickly. He sat down and pressed a few keys softly. The sound was not perfect, but it carried warmth. He played a short melody, simple and slow. The room felt smaller than the grand hall, but somehow more meaningful. Then he looked at her. "Would you play something for me?" he asked. This time there was no audience, no judges, no bright lights, just a small living room and quiet attention. She sat beside him on the bench. For a moment, she felt nervous again. But then she remembered what her mother had said before the competition. "Tell your story." She began to play. The music filled the small space easily. Felt different here, more personal. Her father leaned against the wall, listening carefully. Her mother stood near the kitchen doorway, her eyes soft. The pianist did not interrupt. He listened deeply. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment. "You have something rare," he said finally. "Not just skill, not just practice. You feel the music." She looked down shyly. He opened the small box he had brought. Inside was a set of advanced sheet music, carefully selected. "These pieces are challenging," he explained, "but I believe you are ready to grow. If you are willing, I would like to guide you." Her parents exchanged surprised looks. "Guide her?" her father asked. "I travel often," he said, "but I can arrange lessons when I am in the country, and I can connect her with a scholarship program in the city. She deserves proper training." The room felt silent again, but this time with hope. The girl looked at her parents. They had always supported her, even when money was tight. She could see both pride and concern in their faces. "It will not be easy," the pianist continued. "Training at a higher level requires discipline. There will be sacrifices." She spoke for the first time since he made the offer. "I am not afraid of hard work," she said softly. He smiled. In that moment, he saw not a child who had won a small-town competition, but a musician at the beginning of a long journey. Over the next few weeks, arrangements were made. The scholarship application was submitted. Travel plans were discussed. Practice hours increased. Life became busier. Some evenings were tiring. Schoolwork grew heavier. Practice sessions became longer and more demanding. There were moments when her fingers ached and her confidence shook. But each time doubt appeared, she remembered the night of the competition. She remembered the way the hall had fallen silent. She remembered the change in the pianist's eyes. And she remembered that music had always been her safe place. The famous pianist also found himself changed. During his next concert in a large city, he spoke briefly to the audience before performing. "We must never underestimate potential," he said. "Sometimes the greatest lessons come from unexpected teachers." He did not mention her name. He did not need to. As months passed, the girl continued to grow. Her technique became sharper. Her understanding deepened. But she never forgot the small living room or the old upright piano that had shaped her beginnings. The trophy remained in its place, gathering a thin layer of dust, no longer the center of attention. Because now, the focus was not on winning. It was on becoming. And both the young musician and the seasoned pianist were learning that growth never truly ends. The first trip to the city felt overwhelming. Tall buildings stood close together, and the streets were louder than anything she had known before. Cars moved quickly. People walked with purpose. Everything seemed faster. She held her mother's hand tightly as they stepped out of the bus station. In her other hand, she carried a small bag filled with sheet music and a notebook. The scholarship program had accepted her. That single letter had changed everything. The music academy was larger than her entire neighborhood back home. Glass doors opened into a wide hall where the sound of different instruments echoed from every direction. Violins, cellos, pianos, and voices blended into a strange but beautiful noise. For a moment, she felt very small again. Students her age and older moved confidently through the hallways. Some wore headphones. Others carried thick music folders. Many had been training for years in professional environments. The famous pianist was waiting near the entrance. When he saw her, he gave a simple nod. There were no bright lights this time. No applause. Just a new beginning. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, though her heart was racing. The first lesson was not easy. He did not praise her immediately. Instead, he listened carefully as she played one of the advanced pieces he had given her weeks earlier. Halfway through, he gently stopped her. "You are playing the notes correctly," he said. "But now you must understand why they are there." She looked confused. He explained patiently. "Technique is the skeleton. Emotion is the soul. Without both, the music cannot stand." That day, she learned more in 2 hours than she had learned in months alone. He showed her how to shape phrases more clearly, how to control silence between notes, and how to let the music breathe. When she left the academy that afternoon, her mind felt full. She was excited but also tired. Back home, she practiced everything he had corrected. At first, it felt frustrating. The new expectations were higher. He pointed out mistakes she had never noticed before. Sometimes she wondered if she was truly ready for this level. There were evenings when she sat at the piano and stared at the keys without playing. The music that once flowed easily now felt heavy. Her father noticed. "What is wrong?" he asked gently one night. She hesitated before answering. "What if I was only lucky that day?" she whispered. "What if I cannot grow more than this?" He sat beside her on the old bench. "Do you remember when you first tried to play with both hands?" he asked. She nodded. "You could not do it at first," he reminded her. "But you kept trying. Growth always feels uncomfortable." His words stayed with her. The next lesson was even more demanding. The pianist asked her to repeat one short section again and again. Not faster, not louder, just better. "Listen to yourself," he said. "Not with your ears alone. With honesty." She closed her eyes and played. Slowly, she began to hear the small, uneven touches she had missed before. She adjusted. She tried again. For the first time, she understood that improvement was not about being praised. It was about being truthful with her own effort. Weeks turned into months. She traveled to the city every weekend. The journey was long, but she never complained. On the bus, she would study her sheet music quietly while her mother rested beside her. At the academy, other students began to notice her. At first, some had doubted her because of her age. But talent speaks clearly when given time. One afternoon, the academy announced an internal recital. It would not be as large as the town competition, but important teachers and musicians would attend. Her name was on the list. The night before the recital, she could not sleep. The city felt different at night. Lights from tall buildings shone through the hotel window. She sat on the bed with her notebook open, reading small reminders she had written to herself. Play honestly. Do not rush. Feel the silence. The recital hall at the academy was modern and elegant. The grand piano at center stage looked larger and more polished than any she had ever touched. The keys shone under the lights. Backstage, older students warmed up confidently. Some had performed internationally. Their conversations were calm, almost casual. She felt the familiar nervousness rising again. The pianist approached her quietly. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. He nodded. "Good. It means you care. But remember, the stage is not your enemy. It is your space." When her name was called, she walked toward the piano with steady steps. The hall was not full, but the audience present was experienced. They would notice every detail. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. This time, something was different. She was not trying to prove anyone wrong. She was not thinking about the trophy from months ago. She was not worried about age or reputation. She was simply ready. The first notes flowed smoothly. Her control was stronger now. The corrections from her teacher had shaped her playing deeply. The difficult sections felt clearer. The pauses between phrases felt natural. Halfway through, she felt the same calm she had felt in her living room long ago. The music rose and fell like a conversation. When she finished, there was a short silence, followed by respectful applause. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was sincere. After the recital, one of the senior instructors approached her teacher. "She has potential," the instructor said quietly. "Real potential." The pianist nodded, but he did not look surprised. Later that evening, he spoke to her privately. "You have taken an important step," he said. "Not because you played perfectly, but because you grew." She smiled softly. For the first time, she understood that success was not a single moment on a stage. It was a series of small improvements repeated daily. As they traveled back home that weekend, she looked out the bus window at the passing lights. The road ahead was long, but she was no longer the girl who simply surprised a judge. She was becoming an artist one lesson at a time. And the pianist, who once laughed at her name on a list, now spoke about her future with quiet pride. Neither of them knew exactly where this journey would lead, but both understood something clearly now. Greatness does not appear in a single performance. It is built slowly, through patience, humility, and courage. Years passed more quickly than anyone expected. The small girl who once struggled to reach the pedals was no longer so small. Her hands had grown stronger. Her posture at the piano had become steady and confident. Yet in many ways, she was still the same person who once practiced in a quiet living room with faded walls. The old upright piano was still there. It had been repaired a few more times. Some keys had been replaced. The wood had been polished carefully by her father one summer afternoon. It no longer looked forgotten. It looked honored. Her training in the city continued. Weekends turned into longer stays. Competitions became more serious. Performances grew larger. She faced halls filled with strangers who knew nothing about her past. They did not know about the small-town competition or the night someone had laughed at her name on a list. But she remembered, not with anger, not with hurt, with gratitude, because that moment had pushed her to prove something, not to others but to herself. The famous pianist had kept his promise. He guided her carefully, never allowing pride to grow too fast. When she performed well, he reminded her to stay humble. When she made mistakes, he reminded her that mistakes were teachers. One evening, she was invited to perform at a respected concert hall in the city. It was not a competition this time. It was a shared concert with several promising young musicians. Her name appeared on printed programs for the first time without any mention of her age. Backstage, she adjusted the simple bracelet her mother had given her years ago. It had become her quiet reminder of home. Her parents were sitting in the audience that night. They had saved money for months to attend. The pianist stood beside her. "Do you remember the first time we met?" he asked with a soft smile. She smiled back. "Yes, I remember it clearly too," he admitted. "I almost missed something important because I was too sure of myself." She looked at him with respect. "You didn't miss it," she said gently. "You listened." He nodded, accepting her kindness. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with calm steps. The hall was larger than any she had played in before. The lights were bright but no longer frightening. She sat at the grand piano and placed her hands on the keys. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes. She saw her childhood living room. She heard her father repairing instruments. She felt her mother's reassuring hand before her first competition. Then she began to play. The music carried years of growth inside it. There was depth now shaped by discipline. There was strength shaped by doubt overcome. And there was still honesty, the same honesty that had once filled a small town hall. The audience listened closely. Some leaned forward. Some closed their eyes. The famous pianist watched from the side of the stage. He did not watch with judgment anymore. He watched with quiet pride. When she reached the most delicate section of the piece, her touch softened beautifully. The silence between notes felt meaningful. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was forced. She was no longer playing to surprise anyone. She was playing because music had become part of who she was. When the final chord faded, the hall remained silent for a second, just like that first competition years ago. Then applause filled the room. It was warm and lasting. She stood and bowed gracefully. Her eyes searched the audience and found her parents. Her mother's face was glowing with tears. Her father's hands clapped proudly, his rough palms meeting again and again. After the concert, people approached her to offer congratulations. Some asked about her training. Some asked about her future plans. She answered politely, but her thoughts were simple. She wanted to keep learning. She wanted to keep growing. Later that night, after the hall had emptied and the lights had dimmed, she remained alone on stage for a few minutes. The pianist joined her. "You have surpassed my expectations," he said quietly. She shook her head slightly. "I am still learning," she replied. He smiled. "Good. Never stop." He paused, then added, "One day, you will guide someone else the way I guided you. And when that day comes, remember this lesson." "Which lesson?" she asked. "Never decide someone's future before hearing their music." Those words stayed with her. Years later, she would remember them clearly. As her career continued to grow, she traveled to different cities and countries. She played in halls she had once only seen in pictures. Reviews described her performances as honest and moving. But no matter how far she traveled, she returned home whenever she could. She would sit at the old upright piano and play simple melodies, just for herself. Sometimes children from the neighborhood gathered near the open window to listen. One afternoon, a small child knocked on her door, asking shyly if she could learn to play. The memory of her own childhood returned instantly. She invited the child inside. The little hands were uncertain at first, pressing keys too hard or too softly. The sounds were uneven, but she did not laugh. She did not doubt. She listened. She guided gently, correcting patiently, encouraging quietly. In that moment, she understood the full circle of her journey. The words once spoken about her had become a lesson, not a wound. "She's just a child," someone had once said. But a child had carried music strong enough to change a heart. And now, she was helping another child discover their own sound. The famous pianist eventually retired from large tours. In interviews, when asked about the most important lesson of his career, he often spoke about humility. He would tell the story of a young performer who reminded him that talent has no age. He never mentioned his early laughter. He only spoke about the music. As for her, she continued to play, not for trophies or titles, but for connection. Because in the end, that was what had mattered from the very beginning. Not the competition, not the applause, but the courage to sit at a piano, place small hands on the keys, and let the heart speak without fear.